We all love to drink wine, but there's a lot about wine many of us don't know, so we made these videos. This is Winemaking 101. Because we love Riesling, we'll talk about winemaking for Riesling. Although there are some differences in making white or red wine, the overall process is very similar. There are 5 main steps to winemaking: harvest, crush, fermentation, clarification and stabilization, and bottling. So where does winemaking begin? Many people would say winemaking begins in the vineyard, but it actually begins in the winemaker's head. What style of wine do we want? What do we want the wine to smell and taste like? What balance of acidity, sweetness, and alcohol do we want? These are all the elements that make up our wine's aroma and flavor profile. Once we know the type of wine we want, we need to find a vineyard that will produce the perfect grapes for our wine. When the vineyard bears fruit, usually 3 years after planting, our next decision is when to harvest the grapes. Do we want a brighter style wine with higher acid and lower alcohol? Then we need to pick the grapes early in the harvest season. Do we want a more lush wine with lower acid and higher alcohol? Then we should pick the grapes a bit later. The most important consideration for harvest is sugar. Because sugar becomes alcohol in the fermentation process, we measure the sugar levels in grapes to determine the right harvest time. Grape sugar levels are measured in Brix. Brix is the percentage of sugar in the juice. The more sugar in the grapes at harvest, or the higher Brix, the higher alcohol potential in the wine during fermentation. We also watch acid levels and the development of flavors very closely. Watching the Weather Channel at this time of year is critical. Hot weather can quickly raise sugar levels or Brix of the grapes. Rainy weather can promote diseases in the vineyard and can ruin a crop. Once our harvest date is determined, the harvest can either be done by hand or by machine. Machine picking is widely used for its cost effectiveness and its ability to pick cold grapes at night. Hand picking allows us to sort the best grapes within our vineyard, say for a reserve wine. Now that we're done with harvest, we're thrilled to see the grapes arrive at the winery. Immediately, the grapes head straight to the press for a gentle squeeze. A grape press can differ in size from a very small hand crank press to an enormous bladder press. The press not only makes the juice, but it helps separate non-wine stuff, like skin, seeds, and twigs. Winemakers call that MOG. That's short for material other than grapes. In addition to freeing the juice, the pressing process extracts some flavor from the skins, which largely contributes to the final character of the wine. After pressing, we cold settle the juice for 24 hours to separate the clear juice from the solid matter. We then transfer the clean juice to the stainless steel tank. Fermentation is the transformation of sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide by yeasts. You can either buy commercial yeast or just use the ones that naturally live on the grapes. Temperature is a critical factor to preserve aromas and enhance mouthfeel. Fermentation is controlled by monitoring the temperature in the stainless steel tanks. Temperature for fermentation of white wines is around 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Our fermentation is complete once we achieve the desired balance of sugar and alcohol. If we want a sweeter wine, we'll stop the fermentation process early to preserve higher sugar levels. If we want a wine with higher alcohol, we'll allow more fermentation time for the yeast to keep consuming the sugars. How do we stop those yeasts from consuming more and more sugar? Fermentation is halted either by dramatically cooling down the tanks or by separating the yeasts and the wine via a centrifuge. Following the fermentation process, our wine is somewhat cloudy and not what you usually get at the store. It'll taste like wine, but it'll be cloudy in appearance, and frankly, it's unstable. So we need to stabilize and filter the wine. A wine is exposed to all kinds of extreme conditions as it travels from the winery to the wine shop to your home. If our wine gets too hot, proteins in the wine can coagulate, giving the wine a lava lamp appearance. These proteins are removed by putting the wine in contact with a clay called bentonite. The positively charged proteins attach to the negatively charged clay like a magnet and sink to the bottom of our tank. Cold stabilization is also important. If our wine gets too cold, tartrates or small jewel-like crystals can form in our wine. Removal of tartrates is achieved by dramatically lowering the temperature in the tank. Like the clay for heat stabilization, the crystals settle safely to the bottom of the tank and the clean wine can be pumped out. Finally, the wine is filtered to guarantee its stability and purity. Now we're ready for the time we've all been waiting for: bottling. With the wine fermented, stabilized, and filtered, it's on to bottling. Our wine is pumped from our stainless steel tanks to a bottling line. The bottling line is comprised of a filler, a corker, or a capper for screw caps, and a labeler. Once labeled and placed into cases, our wine is ready to ship to the warehouse. We now have our finished wine, ready to drink. So let's recap. Winemaking involves harvest, crush, fermentation, clarification and stabilization, and bottling. The next time you open a bottle of wine, take a minute to consider the journey the wine has been through on its way to your dinner table. But don't think about it too long. After all, wine is made to be enjoyed. This has been Winemaking 101, brought to you by Pacific Rim Winery.